It's almost Halloween and there's a new Halloween movie coming, so it seemed like a good time to visit the Myers house once again and also answer more Halloween unanswered questions. But this time, we're doing things differently since you guys have asked the questions. I asked you a while back to leave me some questions, and these are the 10 that got the most likes for me to answer on this edition of Unanswered Questions Ends. Question number 1. Jotto Rose wants to know, what happened to Michael's parents? In the original film, we're introduced to the Myers family in the opening sequence. The family consists of young Michael, his older sister Judith, who he pretty horribly murders, and then we briefly see their parents. They're Edith and Peter Myers, and after their daughter's death, they have young Michael committed to Smith's Grove, where he spends the next big chunk of his life. But what happened to his parents after that? Well, this answer, like a lot of what we're going to discuss today, depends on which timeline we're discussing. There are 4 distinct continuities in the Halloween franchise, which we'll refer to as the Thorn timeline, the H20, and yes, I said 20 because I'm pedantic like that, timeline, the Zombie timeline, and the H40 timeline. In terms of the Zombieverse, it's pretty easy since his parents play a more prominent part of the story. It's said that his father passed away at some point when he was younger, and he was raised by his mother, Deborah. During the film, she's dating a man named Ronnie, who's a bit of an abusive ass, and Michael kills him as well as his older sister. Later on, his mother would go on to commit suicide and then just show up as a ghost here and there. In our original universe, it's also fairly concrete. During the course of the second film, Nurse Marion tells Loomis that 2 years after Michael was committed, they died. There was a novelization of the first film that stated that they just left town, but clearly that was not the direction the films went in, particularly because at that point, there were no plans to have Michael and Laurie be related. Now, in the films, they simply say that the parents were killed and that they died 2 years after Michael was committed, but their method of their death is never given. There is, however, a comic book that depicts the incident, although it gets the date wrong. Michael killed Judith in 1963, and this gravestone says 1966, which is 3 years later instead of 2. The canon of this is questionable, so their method of death is up in the air, but considering Marion says they were killed first, it's clear that their deaths were not of natural cause. And they seemingly died at the same time, so a car crash does seem apt. Since we're talking original timeline, it's pretty fair to think that the Cult of Thorn was responsible for this, with getting the parents out of the way. Now that's 2 timelines covered, but since the H20 timeline keeps the second film in canon, we can just ascribe the same incidents here, minus the involvement of the cult if you like that theory. But that just leaves the H40 timeline, which eliminates the second film, leaving us with just the information from the first film. Now, so far, there has been no in-film mention of his parents, so it's a possibility to just go ahead and use that novelization backstory that they had simply moved away. This is backed up by the novelization of Halloween Kills, in which Frank Hawkins says that he doesn't know what happens to the Myers. After Judith was killed, he says they were simply gone, their house empty. The town theorized that they moved away, intent on starting a new family elsewhere. And this creates a theory that states that Michael's obsession with returning home, which in this timeline he does after escaping the asylum, after the incident with Laurie, and after escaping the burning house, is all part of him simply trying to find his parents. And so, hey, wait. So you're telling me that he returned to his childhood home several times in the past, and the Haddonfield police didn't have a ton of police around it when he escaped again? That sounds like bad writing. I mean, bad planning on their part. Question number 2. Sassy Fassy asked if Sam Loomis from Halloween is Sam Loomis from Psycho. So there's clearly a link to the classic Hitchcock film here. Not only does the film share the Loomis character name, but it also has Jamie Lee Curtis, daughter of Janet Leigh, who played a character named Marion. And there's also a character named Marion in Halloween. So this could just be another little nod, a little tip of the hat to the beloved film. But there's also a theory that it could be a little bit more than that, and that the characters are the same person. It states that Psycho Loomis, after helping to apprehend Norman Bates, became obsessed with psychology and helping people who had mental breaks like Bates had. He went back to school and studied, and eventually moved to the area around Haddonfield and started work at Smith's Grove. They say that the stress of dealing with everything that they went through caused him to gain weight and lose his hair, looking more haggard as he aged. Then he encounters a young Michael, a boy with a psychosis that Loomis recognized from his experience with Norman and attached himself to the case. However, there's tons of problems with this theory. I mean, first of all, Halloween Loomis is British.
Pardon me, I'm Loomis, Dr. Sam Loomis.
Psycho Loomis is not.
My boss is paying for this trip, and, well, it's 90% business.
He would have had to pick up a British accent as some sort of oddball affectation or something. Next is the time factor. Loomis started working with Michael as he was committed, and that was in 1963. Psycho took place in 1959. There's only a 4-year gap in between those two movies, which doesn't seem likely for him to have made that decision and had enough schooling to take on a job with a full-on sanitarium. But then there's the final straw in this theory's back, which makes no sense as a metaphor. What am I doing? Drinking its spinal fluid? But in Psycho 2, which takes place approximately 20 years after the original film, it's stated that Sam Loomis got married to Lila, Marion's sister from the film, and then he died a few years back. That means that he passed away sometime in the late 70s, which doesn't really make sense for fitting in with the Halloween series, especially given the fact that there's no mention of Loomis having a wife there. So no, the characters are not actually connected and merely share a common name. Question number 3. Here's an interesting one from Jed Schaefer, who wants to know why, if Michael has no connection to Laurie, does he spend so much time stalking her? This is a question that doesn't apply to the Thorn timeline, the H2O timeline, or the zombie timeline, since we know in those ones that Laurie and Michael are related, and he's trying to kill his sister. But when the H40 continuity wiped that detail out, it raises the question as to why Michael has so much interest in her anyway. And as much as I kinda like the concept of them being related, I think that this actually does make sense in the context of the original film, and sorta explains some of Michael's inconsistencies. So, here's what happens. Laurie and Tommy walk up to Michael's house, and he catches sight of them and starts to follow. Now, based on the sister stuff, it would seem that's what piqued his interest. But, like, if she were his sister, how would he know outside of some sort of spider sense? And what actually happens here is that she reminds him of his other sister. Laurie's around the same age as Judith was and has a similar look, so that's what catches his attention. So now, here's what breaks it. He leaves the high school and peeping on Laurie to go to Tommy's school and stalk him. So, if his whole interest was following Laurie around because she's his sister, then why would he leave? Why the need to follow Tommy? And it's because the two of them coming to the house brought up those memories. He sees Judith in Laurie. He sees himself in Tommy. At that point, I don't think he's even following Laurie anymore. When he goes to that school to follow Tommy, he's more interested in him than he is Laurie. And I actually think that the next time we see him driving in the car past the 3 girls, that may not have been intentional. I think he was driving home from following Tommy and happened to see them. It was possible that he would have simply continued on if Annie didn't shout at him. I mean, he was just speeding by and didn't seem like he was interested until the old speed kills, and then slowed his roll and hid behind a hedge. He definitely sticks with Laurie again for a bit though, because of the similarity, but here's the thing. He stops following her and decides to stalk Annie. He has the choice for a bit to continue to go after Laurie. I mean, he knows exactly where she is, and the ending shows that he's not above just going in there even if the kids are around. But instead, he decides to follow Annie back to the Wallace house and then stay there for a bit. This shows that he's not wholly obsessed with following and killing Laurie. It's on his agenda, sure, because that reminder is there, but he can be easily swayed by getting at a girl who yelled at him, and then PJ Souls, because everyone is distracted by PJ Souls. Question number 4. Red Davison asks, if Halloween 2 didn't happen, then Ben Tramer survived. What's he up to? Oh, Ben. Poor Ben. All dude wanted to do was hook up with Laurie Strode on Halloween and ends up a Shatner flambe. Ben Tramer, otherwise known as the dude that Loomis got killed. A guy pops out of nowhere and he's not in police uniform and starts waving a gun at you, and you do not even have to be in a modern American school to know that it is time to start running. Of course he does, and gets hit by a police car that is apparently driving at a rather excessive level of speed in a suburban neighborhood full of trick-or-treating kids and goes up in a ball of flame. But hold up, if the H40 timeline says Halloween 2 didn't happen, then he didn't die as a result of Loomis being an idiot and the police being reckless. So then what happened to him? In this timeline, he's just a kid that Laurie had a crush on and isn't that smart and is never seen, just mentioned. He's brought back up in Halloween Kills as Laurie is talking to Hawkins and they discuss a possible relationship in the past. He states that it never happened because she was hung up on Ben Tramer. And this was after a story about him helping her out at a bar. So that means that Laurie was still hung up on Ben for quite a while after high school if she's still nursing that feeling post-drinking age. Now, in Halloween 2018, she states that she's been divorced twice, but it goes deeper than that. Hear me out. Laurie's daughter is Karen. According to her wiki, she's 38 years old, which makes sense. Judy Greer is older than the character, but the absolute oldest the character can be is 39, so 38 makes sense. This means that she was born 2 years after the first film, when Laurie was either 19 or 20. Oddly, director David Gordon Green revealed online that her father was a random man Laurie met at a bar and doesn't even remember his name. First of all, presuming that she was in that bar legally, that would make it a tight squeeze, and here's what I'm thinking. She met up with Hawkins one night at a bar, as she says in Kills, and she's a wreck, and it seems like they had romantic interest, but she was hung up on Tramer. She was hung up on him because they had a fling recently and was actually possibly pregnant with Karen at the time. It's very likely that Ben is Karen's actual dad and Green is just being cagey about the identity. This may be revealed as being BS as soon as Halloween comes out, because I feel like they may try to squeeze the character in there, especially with the death of Karen, but if not, Ben goes from going up in flames to going down on Laurie and then having a baby. That got away from me. Question number 5.
Flex Riley has a Halloween 3 question, and he wants to know how Ellie got turned into an android so fast.
So, famously, Halloween 3 didn't feature Michael Myers, and instead the villains are the evil Silver Shamrock novelties, and the big reveal at the end is that their minions are robots. Near the ending of the movie, our heroes Dan and Ellie are taken captive with her taken first, and the doc manages to escape. Later, he finds Ellie strapped to a table and he rescues her as the pair escape. After destroying Stonehenge, because yes, Halloween 3 has the villain be Stonehenge, which is awesome, she attacks him and it's revealed that she's not Ellie after all and is a robot. But how did they turn her around that quickly? Some people think that she was a robot the entire time and a more sophisticated model that was programmed to interact with people, and you know what that means, Chalice boned a bot. But I don't think that makes sense. Look at how she talks and acts and compare that to after Dan finds her tied up. There's a distinct difference in her demeanor. If she were a model created to seem more human, why wouldn't she act that way when he found her? Well, first of all, I wanted to dispel that she was converted so quickly because it wasn't so quickly. They were captured in the middle of the night, and Dan doesn't escape until later on in the day of Halloween, giving them probably around 12 hours or so to complete their task. And the other point here is that she wasn't converted. It's not like they took her and made her into a robot. No, Ellie's just dead. When we see these guys taking her away right here, that's the last we see of her. They're taking her to some back room to off her. This is just a robot, like all the others. But doesn't a 12-hour window seem a little short to create a complete robot duplicate of someone? Sure, but they don't have to make a complete duplicate. First off, they don't have to imitate or program her personality because she just acts like a blank slate, and I'm sure that they have stock body forms around, like some random male ones and female ones. Literally, all they would have to do is sculpt the head and make an imitation of her face, and considering that they're at a factory that makes robots, I think that 12 hours is plenty of time for that. But there's other questions. You assume that they made the bot to confuse and trick Dan, right? But it's not like they were planning for him to escape. They thought that they had him and were gonna kill him. And there was no way that they could expect that he would randomly stumble on that room and find her there after he escaped. So why did they even duplicate her in the first place? And then, if she were made to stop Dan, why didn't she? The bot just chilled while he brought down the entire operation and didn't actually show its true colors until much later on in the car.
Well, I don't know, Flex Riley. Geez, I already answered your one question. What do you want from me? Maybe in the next volume of Halloween Questions.
Question number 6.
This next question is from your friendly neighborhood Uncle Pete, and he wants to know if there's any possibility that the Myers-Shatner mask could be from Silver Shamrock.
Now, I've seen this theory floating around, and it's that the mask of Michael is a part of the whole Silver Shamrock plan. But there's more to it than that, of course. First of all, we need to establish that Halloween 3 takes place in the same universe as the others, which I kind of already did in my first Halloween UQ video, so go check that out so I don't have to repeat myself here. But since then, the 3 masks have appeared in Halloween Kills, establishing even further that they not only exist in continuity, but they're rooted in the world of the first film. But to say that the shape mask is cursed eliminates one minor detail, and that's the fact that Michael was way evil before ever putting that thing on. His darkness began all those years ago on Halloween night, so I think that there's very little chance of that. But what about that clown mask? What if, bear with me here because I've already linked the Cult of Thorn to Conal Cochran's group, they're connected via Mrs. Blankenship, and it's shown that the cult was involved with the Curse of Thorn and Michael in the first place. What if his mask, that original clown mask, was tampered with by the cult? I theorized that in that timeline, the one where the Cult of Thorn exists and has a connection to Silver Shamrock, that mask was their method of transferring that curse into him. Everyone said that he was a normal little boy up until that night, but make a special delivery of a very special mask with a very special purpose, and that's to transfer dark energy into him and create their emissary. Question number 7.
Okay, Hunter X05 wants to know exactly how Loomis survived that explosion.
The ending of Halloween 2 is pretty final. In a big showdown between Loomis, Michael, and Laurie, the good doc gets stabbed and Michael gets his eyes shot out. Sam then sets off an explosion that destroys an entire section of the hospital and seems pretty unsurvivable. We see Michael emerge from the blast pretty much covered in flames and it seems to consume him, but he's always been pretty resilient, so it should be no surprise to find out that he lived. But in Halloween 4, we see that he's not the only one. Loomis is fine and seems to have only suffered some mild scarring on the side of his face and a limp. So how in the hell did that happen? How did a regular dude survive this? Well, although it's not in the film, there actually was an explanation in the film's script. There, it was revealed that the initial force of the blast sent him flying, and he was knocked into the adjacent hallway. He was then shielded from the ensuing fireballs, suffering only minor burns. The impact would explain the limp, I guess, and let's face it, it's a pretty slim explanation, but it works. In the end, Dwight Little, Part 4's director, stated that he thought it would be best to not show it and simply leave it up to the imagination of the viewer. And by viewer, he meant me. He was like, look, in about 30 years or so, there's going to be this dude who's going to drive himself nuts trying to come up with rationales for this stuff, so just leave it be. Let him do the work for us.
Thanks, Dwight.
So yeah, you can go with the whole thrown across the room thing if you want. I mean, that works, it's fine. But I have more to add to this because think about it. If the blast was enough to send Loomis flying, then why didn't it do the same to Michael? And we've now seen Sam survive a scalpel, an explosion, another slashing in Part 5, and being thrown against a banister, a goddamn stroke, and getting clocked in the head by a goon, because in real life, head injuries like this aren't just harmless. I know in film that human skulls are like whack-a-moles, but not so much in reality. And let's face it, Loomis survives a number of things that should do in a normal human being, and he's not really a young man or an in-shape one. He ends up less damaged from the hospital explosion than freaking Michael Myers does. So look, there's clearly other forces at work here. And I say, if we're saying in this timeline the Cult of Thorn is in full effect and the curse is what's driving Michael in his resilience, who's to say that there's not an equal and opposite force opposing it? Perhaps, unknowingly, Loomis is the avatar of this force driving his obsession with stopping Michael. Sure, it's personal, but it's also because he's a pawn for an outside entity, which could account for some of his erratic behaviors and shifting personalities. When Michael is more active, the good curse is as well, making him more irritable and erratic.
Or, you know,
they got thrown into a hallway.
Question number 8.
Rob Dorn wants to know why on earth Haddonfield would even want to still celebrate Halloween.
And yeah, you'd think that after all that stuff going on that they'd just give up, but it's a little cleaner than that. First off, you have 3 movies worth that technically only encompass one bad Halloween for Haddonfield. Parts 1 and 2 are on the same night, and 3 takes place in another state. But then there's a 10-year gap between that one night and Michael's return, so it's pretty clear why they still celebrate in Part 4. I'll get back to Part 5 in a minute, but Part 6 takes place after a 6-year gap between films, and they actually did cancel Halloween, and that movie has them tentatively beginning to celebrate it again. So that leaves Part 5 as the only one in the early set in which it would be a thing. And apparently, having 2 bad holidays in a row was enough for the town. So I think the Thorn timeline is covered, and it makes sense why they would still have the holiday in between. Now, the H20 timeline makes that even more concrete because it wipes out 3 through 6. And then, that one doesn't even take place in Haddonfield. Resurrection does, but keep in mind in this continuity, it's been about 23 years since that one bad night the town had, so there's definitely reason for them to still have the holiday. The Zombieverse I don't think I need to explain because it reboots it all, and the H40 timeline is the same. They have the holiday because it's been 40 years since the Myers incident, and it was a one-time thing. Besides, you're gonna tell people that they can't celebrate Hallow-freaking-ween, the best holiday of the year? The next thing you're gonna say is that they can't have unprotected sex with co-eds when you go camping. Question number 9.
The next question comes from the 4 mood groups, and he wants to know if Michael Myers is supernatural.
Again, we have to discuss this question in multiple parts since it's a different approach in each continuity, since they all approach the backstory to the character in a different way. If we're discussing the Thorn timeline, then it's absolutely certain that Michael is supernatural. Even if you were to eliminate the Thorn cult element and presuppose that they're mistaken about his even coming from the Thorn rune, the guy survives an unnatural amount of damage throughout the series, including bullets in the eyes. On top of that, he has a sort of mystical connection to his family members and is able to sense his niece, and the two share some sort of psychic bond, which definitely follows under the supernatural category. The Rob Zombie timeline, I think, rules out any supernatural elements. It does dance around them a bit in the second film with the possibility of some sort of psychic link between Michael and Laurie, but I actually believe that to be more an element of hereditary psychosis than anything mystical. In these two films, Michael himself doesn't appear to exhibit any supernatural abilities outside of just being more resilient to damage, but his drastically increased size and strength can account for that. So, then there's the confusing two. The H20 timeline doesn't really have a Michael that seems supernatural. I mean, sure, seems hard to kill, but he doesn't appear to take any sort of damage that you would roll your eyes at and say, come on, no one could live through that. But here is one thing that gives me some suspicions, and it's a single shot of Michael's perfect and intact eyeball. Dude was blinded at the ending of the second film with 2 bullet wounds to his peepers. I know that there's some theories about how they didn't go in his eyes but grazed them and he's blinded by blood running in them, but I don't really see any evidence of that in the film. I feel like that would show some sort of damage to the mask, and their trajectory doesn't make any sense that way. So to me, those eyes are toast, and a Thorn timeline curse would certainly explain them being healed, but that's not in this version. So how is this orb all purdy? The only answer is by supernatural means. This Michael must have some sort of unnatural regenerative abilities in order to be able to see again. Hell, from what we can see of his skin, he doesn't even seem to be burned from the big fire. So even that has been healed. So yeah, that guy's supernatural too. Although there is one other explanation I can think of there, but I'm going to save that for that other volume of questions I was talking about earlier. So that only leaves the H40 timeline. So far, there really hasn't been enough information to give us proof one way or the other. Although Halloween Kills does seem to show Michael take an inhuman amount of damage and still be able to get up. While at the same time, Laurie talks about how the more that Michael kills, the more he transcends into something else and something impossible to defeat, hinting pretty greatly that he's backed by some other supernatural means. I guess we'll find out whether that is the truth in the upcoming sequel. Question number 10.
And this last one's for me, and it's one that there's been some discussion on recently, and that's whether or not Michael is still a virgin.
Recently, someone asked this question of John Carpenter himself, and JC said that he believed that the killer still had that V-card in his wallet. He said that he thought that he never was able to because he confused sex with killing, which can be backed up by the intro of the original film. After watching his older sister do the deed, his first instinct was to draw a large kitchen knife and plunge it into her. Again, we have to break this down through what we see in each timeline. Now, in the Thorn timeline, we sort of had an answer. We know that he went to the hospital very young and basically stared at a wall until he escaped. So, in the context of the first and second movies, he's still chaste. He's then in a coma for 10 years, so no nookie there. And then asleep in a vagrant's bed for a year, so still no action. But then there's part 6, specifically the producer's cut, in which it is heavily implied that Jamie's baby is the product of an incestuous action from Michael. However, in order to go with this, first of all, you have to take the producer's cut as the canon cut, which is debatable. And secondly, you have to presume that they didn't use some sort of artificial means of impregnating her. A case can be made for Michael to have slapped Ham, but it's not guaranteed. Rob Zombie Michael absolutely did not have sex. He had the same staring at the wall thing going on in the first film, and in the interim between films, no one's sleeping with that dirty dude. And then age 40 Michael is definitely a no-go on the bone throw because he's just a big nothing while in the hospital, locked down and zoned out. There's no chance for that guy to have danced the forbidden dance. But what about age 20 Michael? I mean, if anyone got laid, it's that guy. He was out in the world for 20 years, unattended, and with no comas going on, and imprisonment. Sure, he was still pretty single-mindedly obsessed with killing his family, but what? He was just sitting around in someone's place for 2 decades? I'm sure this version did something in that interim, and one of those things may possibly have been bumping uglies.
So there you have it, 10 more questions about Halloween that you guys asked. Hopefully you like the answers that I came up with you. Thank you guys for supplying these questions. I thought this was a lot of fun to kind of answer your questions instead of ones that I had myself. It was a different way to approach this. I'm going to do that again in the future with some other things, but I hope you enjoyed these questions. If not, let me know down below in the comments. If you have other questions about the Halloween movies, let me know those down below as well. As always, if you like this video, give it a like. If you enjoy what you see on the channel, hit the subscribe button, and of course check out my patrons. They help keep this channel going and they help support me, and I'd appreciate it if you did the same thing by going to patreon.com/movietimelines. It'd be pretty awesome of you to do so. And you know what, we'll see you on the next episode of Unanswered Questions.